as consultants and as agencies, we are not paid enough to be able to do a good job. Um, the
That's a
point
big
is, like, you
statement.
can, well, when you think about recommendations, like as consultants, we're like, hey, do this, do this, do that. We don't have the like obligation to see it through.
Janis, welcome to the show. How you doing, sir?
Very good. Greetings from Canada. Across the border, our borders are closed. Nobody can go in and out between our two countries, or at least not for leisure.
Right, but at least we can talk over the internet. Can't give
Yeah,
each
it
other
doesn't stop
COVID
us.
or anything like that. Last I checked.
Not yet. Not yet.
So
No, we're
are
good.
you in Vancouver or what part of
Yeah, I've
Canada?
been here for 13 years. Vancouver, West Coast. It's if have you been here?
I have, yeah, actually, I think it was about a year ago. I went to hang out with
Oh,
Jason Billingsley.
oh, really?
Yeah,
Right.
who is the I
That's
like
awesome.
spent a week hanging out with him, and he's like the first person that told me about you.
Yes.
So
Oh,
yeah.
wow. That's I love that connection. I recently reached out to him as well, and yeah. Well, Jason was responsible for bringing me to Canada.
Okay. Right, right, right. This is
He was
sounding familiar.
he was heading Elastic Path at that time, and Elastic Path won the contract to provide e-commerce service for Winter Olympics 2010 in Vancouver, and yeah, and they were casting a net wide because like that was pre-recession. Everybody was bringing people over here, and Jason hired me to come from Europe to help out with like UX and front end experience, and ended up helping with Olympics.
That's awesome.
And you met him. Yeah, so
Yeah,
he is very key. He's very key. Very good guy.
he's a great dude.
And
What
he's now another really like booming industry like real estate.
Yeah,
With his company that he's been for a while.
yeah.
So he knows how to tap in the right markets.
Yes, he does. Yes, he does. What kind of stuff did you do for the Olympics? You mentioned UX and stuff like that. What kind of work did you do?
So that was, well, starting 2008. Um, so a bunch of these disciplines were present, but they're not as evolved. So for me, we were responsible for handling everything for Olympics in terms of e-commerce, anything from design to platform to warehousing, customer service. So like full service, because Olympic Committee doesn't do anything themselves. They only contract out companies to do it all for them. So Elastic Path had this contract to do everything for torch relay, Paralympics, Main Olympics, and we also had a contract with Hudson Bay Company and Hockey Canada. So these are really big three organizations that we were able to build all the e-commerce for them, customer service and fulfillment.
Mm.
My specific responsibility was the design, the A/B testing, front end experience, UX side, and it was fascinating because at that time, that was when we did the first A/B testing for checkout. You know, there was a time when it was multi-page checkout, and we redesigned it into a single page. And we were partnered with a company called Wider Funnel with Chris Goward here in Vancouver. Really great company, like a conversion optimization, focusing a lot of ecom, and they helped us with some of the methodology. And that's when we switched from multi-page checkout to single page, and we saw a change. And the funny thing, then fast forward maybe 8 years later, when I'm running an ecom at a biotech company, we went from single page to multi-page because it was much better. And so it goes in a circle how some certain industries just like the same things don't work. Just because you've written something or designed some really good checkout doesn't mean it works for everything.
It's funny you mentioned the checkout stuff. I was looking at I think I was looking at the Big Commerce Open checkout that they
Mm-hmm.
launched recently, and there was some different layout. They were giving some different examples of the types of checkout customizations you could do, and one of them reminded me exactly of one-step checkout for Magento. I don't know if you were into Magento at all, but there was this plugin called One-Step Checkout, which kind of simplified the checkout for Magento and became a very popular extension.
Mm-hmm.
I think they're based out of oh gosh, I want to say Norway. I could be wrong, but one of the countries up there close to you guys. And in
Yeah,
you're originally from
I'm originally from Latvia.
Latvia. That's right. Yeah.
Yeah,
But
spent 8 years in Lithuania, so people mix up those countries, which is fine. They're not the same, but at least like, but it's for most people, it's up there, Eastern,
they're all
Northern
really
Europe.
cool countries. That's the thing.
I think
Um,
the cool countries everybody associates is the Scandinavian. We are crossing the Baltic Sea, and then you have Latvia, Lithuania, Estonia. They're nice countries. So, but nobody really knows of them as cool. Like like we don't have the as much musicians coming through
right.
from there. Skype actually is from Estonia
Really?
originally.
Is
Yeah,
that where Skype was built? It was in
I believe
Estonia?
so. Yeah.
Oh, that's awesome. That's really cool. I remember hearing some things that really were interesting to me about it might have been an Estonian government related to, I, don't know, I can't remember what it was. It was like internet or,
Yeah, they're the most advanced one.
right, right,
Yeah, they
right.
do the voting through online.
That was it.
Uh,
Yep.
so it's interesting. That topic has come up before, and I think maybe because of the elections, or but I've had another conversation about that recently. What people miss is we're asked why Latvia and Estonia and Lithuania, because they're called Baltic states and they're very like we go everywhere together, but they're very different, quite different. And I think if I'm right, when we joined European Union in 2004, there's a lot of money from Europe coming in those countries to support infrastructures, to support various different rules. For example, it was subsidizing farmers to not do certain type of crop, or not for fishermen to not do the fishing, because it already exists. That already existed within the European Union, so they're subsidizing the farmers not to do anything. And there's a lot of different other money coming for roads and other infrastructure. And what Estonia did really well, very very early on, they took a lot of that money and invested in tech,
Mm,
in IT, in tech, and that was both in education and infrastructure. And um, Latvia and Lithuania didn't do that much at all. Or not nearly as much as Estonia. I'd like to think that's the reason why so much great stuff is coming from there
mm,
now. That in comparison to Latvia and Lithuania, that maybe Estonia is also enjoying being closer to proximity to Finland. There's also good kind of Scandinavian money coming in,
mm.
or other thinking, but that's, yeah, like Estonia, like e-government, voting, so many different things they just do online, and the rest of the world is still just trying to figure out
Yeah.
like how does that work.
Yeah.
And
I can't. I'm starting to lose count of the number of times I think to myself, without getting too much into politics, but like, why can't we vote online? I mean, it's just it's crazy. And I
I don't
know,
know. I mean, you would think that bank like the what's the like I'm when I'm doing some services in Latvia, if I need to access some government related services, or even here in Canada, I could log into them through my bank account. So bank takes care of authentication
right?
and then authorizes that, like, authenticates that you're the real person, and then that gives me the permission to access that other system.
Right.
I I have the same question. What's up? That seems to be
Yeah.
like you could also possibly use the same thing
Yeah.
for like like authentication is through banks, and maybe because that's just not everybody can do that, and you have to prevent double voting. If you've voted online, what prevents you from taking that ballot, like, or going showing off
Right.
offline
Right.
and to vote that? I think that's maybe the biggest concern. But
Yeah.
Seems to be the tech is there.
Yeah, I know. And there are arguments that, like things are not as secure when there's different ways things can be hacked if it were online. But then the tie into e-commerce is I go, okay, well, what if everybody was had to walk around handing each other paper money to do e-commerce? It would make no sense, you know. Um,
Yeah,
so
yeah. It's I mean, there's so much already being done, and I could understand there's certain type of maybe like a federal election, maybe the federal, like that kind of like huge elections, presidential elections might not be something you want to test out it on,
right,
but there might be some municipal ones,
right,
some
right.
smaller ones that you could test it out. How does that work? I don't know. I mean, we are dealing with big countries, Estonia. I mean, I can't remember how many million there are in Latvia, for example. There's 2 million people, so uh, the diversity of banks and different systems is not going to be as huge as you're
Right.
going to see it in the US and
Right.
Canada.
Yeah.
So that might be another reason.
Yeah, hopefully we'll make some progress on that soon. But what have you been working on recently that's top of mind for you?
That is top of mind for me right now. Like so for me, I've switched. I focus both on product development and e-commerce. So I have found both of those worlds are really really big in my life, in my professional life right now. I work a lot with agencies, other good digital agencies. Like there's somewhere like Apply Digital. They've done amazingly good job with the digital product development in North America, and there's a Domain 7 as well. Similar, both of them are in Vancouver, and and then there's also clients that I work directly, and so for me, I constantly have this a little bit like a dual life going on, like e-commerce, but I find that e-com and product development is becoming similar. Like whether you're making apps for e-com system or whether you make apps for some other system, or it's kind of the same stuff. You have to understand the customer, the user, like business priorities, technology capabilities,
Hmm.
and so for me in e-commerce world, what I find is I find a switch from, or I have found this niche working with some almost like this interim ecom director, um, where the client is not as big to be able to afford an agency to do everything for them, and they are not as big either to be able to hire like in-house everyone, and so they need someone who is coming from outside with an experience to work with internal resources to guide them and manage them, like project manage them almost, and get the work done. So that's been an interesting kind of like a little switch that I've experienced. And so instead of working for one e-commerce company to build everything out, you start having these clients that need almost like this interim e-commerce manager as a service.
Hmm. Hmm.
Uh, I
That's
recently spoke
Oh no, sorry, please go ahead.
No, no, it's recently spoke even to another agency. Interesting friend of mine came from Boston Consulting Group in London, Digital Ventures, and they are talking about almost like a co-founder as a service. Um, so there might be some service level um, jobs, so to say, that the company doesn't need you full time. They can't afford you full time, and they have their own internal resources, but they just need to be guided better.
Right.
So it's an interesting concept. We'll see where that goes. Maybe there's just a need right now.
That's really interesting because a lot of time I'm thinking of a whole big wholesaler I talked to recently, who is looking to do some hiring, and some like most of the time when somebody's hiring through Commerce Hero, it tends to be an agency. That's sort of the niche that works out well for us. They have a team of
You know,
developers. They want to add a developer to a team. When I deal directly with merchants, it's almost like there's like a translation issue sometimes, and I can sometimes now start to sense that like they needed that e-commerce director or that e-commerce manager role to kind of drive things, and so they might
yep,
think like, oh, I need to hire a developer or a technical lead or something like that, but What they really need is like you, like that type of a person, the ecom director as a service kind of a thing, to help them kind of drive things and define things.
Yeah, and quite often what happens is even if they are bringing in that developer, which might be the right choice, they need to be able to speak the language, to be understand how to manage a developer. Quite often these companies they're good businesses. They have passion. They probably have started offline, and they've run their first e-commerce store on something very basic, and now they want to grow and bring in another, like some specialists or developers or designers. Uh, doesn't mean that suddenly they will be able to do all the magic for them. The owner also needs to be able to manage that type of discipline.
Yeah.
That you have to be able to speak the developer's language. It's easy to get frustrated. It doesn't work. Why is it has bugs? But you need to be able to speak that language, provide the details on the level that they need, and that's where I started originally as a designer. I started earning money as a designer, so that has given me an understanding of what design is. I can't do it anymore. Every designer is so much better. It has evolved. The different tools that are being used, but I can speak that language.
Yeah.
And same is for tech. I I, I started. Not it's not like development, but I did build websites on like that when the CSS came out. I remember I was doing the transition from like, hey, we're not doing tables, we're doing CSS, and that gave me a little bit better understanding of development. And I've learned and I've been working with engineers like most of my professional life now, and that gives me an ability to speak their language. So I'm almost finding that I'm in the middle between business and technology and design,
Mhm.
and I'm able to speak all their languages without them needing like a lead in each.
Mhm.
And yeah, like it's sometimes you need that translator to set the foundation.
Mhm.
But I don't think that the company needs me like forever. There's
Right.
sometimes you just need to have solve a problem.
Right.
Otherwise, at other times the retainer, 1 day a week, 2 days a week, depends on how crazy it is.
Right.
So that's been a big topic for me. And and then in the product development, there's similar like head of product, like interim head of product, where company is growing like crazy. This amazing company called Interactio, they uh, we know when you go to conferences or some big events where multilingual speakers are performing, churches, uh, they every time you go there, you need a headset to pick up a
Yep.
headset so you know what's happening.
Yep.
So what they figured out is that you don't need that headset that just wears down and nobody wants to really like use somebody else like headphones and put them on yourself, especially in this world right now that we're just so careful not to do anything. But that was before. Everybody has a phone, so that's already that device, the receiver. Most people carry their own headphones with them, and you have Wi-Fi, so you do not need that hardware that was industry standard. You do not need that hardware anymore.
Right.
You can simply have an app through Wi-Fi, and an interpreter doesn't need to be at the event. They could be somewhere else. So the costs are so much smaller. So what they did with now that the COVID started, they obviously events dropped significantly, but the government, especially in Europe, where you have 10, 15 different languages spoken at the same time, you need the ability for governments to have meetings and them translated. So Zooms and regular tools don't really work because you have 15, 20 people simultaneously talking. So that wouldn't work. That would be a terrible meeting. So they built on the foundation that on the previous foundation they built that tool. So they've been doing so successfully well that they are still a small team. So they need an extra kind of very temporary help to come in and help to solve some of the problems that they never thought they need to face. There's some of the product management, some of that is just like people management process. Things that we laugh, like somebody with gray hair to come in and give some give some guidance, but really they've done an amazing heroic job. Like it's like what they've done, but they need an additional help now to survive that crazy growth
Yeah.
for the next 6 months. So that's another thing on my mind a lot now.
It's interesting the space related to conferences, virtual conferences. I've been thinking about that because I would go to conferences somewhere regularly and kind of enjoyed them. And in some ways, a lot of the podcasting I'm doing is kind of a replacement for that conference hallway track.
Mm,
And different companies are attacking, solving this problem in different ways. There's a solution called Hopin, which is like a online event platform that has some cool features to it, like networking features. But you
hmm.
can never really recreate the in-person
No,
experience of a conference. But I'm
not at all.
I'm interested in seeing if we're getting closer to that. If there's stuff out there that's getting incrementally closer to experiences that really make you feel almost in person.
Like, what do you miss about in-person conferences the most now?
I think it's that's a great question. It's the whole experience. It's going somewhere, being somewhere new, being in a conference space, hanging out with buddies, colleagues and who are colleagues and friends, and just talking informally about things, um, and just the connection.
Yeah, I
Um,
find that it's not the knowledge often what I miss.
yeah,
The knowledge exists there.
yeah,
Like you don't need to go to a conference to learn something,
yeah,
really. Like I mean, no
yeah,
matter how we justify the budgets, like
yeah.
it's really just there to network, to hang out with your friends, to hang out with industry people.
Yeah,
It's not, at least in my experience, it hasn't been as much. Whenever I've gone to conferences, be like, okay, yeah, like I've known that, and that's not speaking that I know everything, but it's I would love to speak to speakers, and like I love to meet up with friends. I love to just be in different places, and I think that's maybe what the conference really adds.
yeah,
That and like now we can't really have the same thing.
yeah,
It's not the same. It's not
yeah,
the same. Yeah, it's blowing up. I mean, comfort like the digital like event startups, education is crazy. Like a good friend of mine, she's running a new education company called Class Rebel. And that's on a premise that the like the learning is not stopping anymore at the university level. Like the learning is becoming lifestyle. It's almost like a social club of learning, and so how do we bring that in? Like we have Coursera's and we have master classes, and those are successful in their ways, and but there's something about live education, like live scalable education, so to say, that something is still um, unearthed, maybe not fully like developed, because we have so much material, again, so much blogs, so much Coursera, so much masterclass, all these videos exist so much, but there's something about us still not going through them, and I think because there's that live ability to talk to an instructor, ability um, to intervene or like discuss with other classmates, like that's something that is missing for the corporate education, but kind of like the professional education, not corporate professional education.
mhm.
So that's another interesting place, um, that I'm seeing a growth because of this isolation that we have. So
Yeah, I think
you
the
know,
the online education space is so interesting. There's so many companies attacking it from different angles. Lambda School is one I'm really interested in. It's like a coding school with an interesting financing model, where you don't pay anything unless you graduate and get a job. And I think a lot
yeah,
about
I
like,
saw that, and I was very curious. This is maybe my I don't know why I thought it's like, okay, what's the mechanism of like them checking up on you and getting paid? Like if
that's a good
it's
question.
like a lot of honor system, I wonder.
Yeah, I don't know exactly. I'm sure they have, some kind of a system to deal with that. I believe I saw the founder at one point tweeted some of the numbers of any problems they had with collecting payment. It was a pretty small number. Um, but yeah, that's it's called an income share agreement, an ISA, and I think that in and of itself is kind of might become an industry in and of itself. These income share agreements, because there's so many issues with
Well,
student
it's
loan
this
debt,
like these micro payments,
which
and
is
yeah, it's like that what we just see, like who is going public now? Firma, filing for IPO. Um, the micro payments,
mm.
and so you have the installment payments. And so you is
Oh,
that
is it
something
Affirm?
similar? Are we?
The installment
Yeah, Affirm.
payments?
Yeah,
Yep.
that's like, and then Shopify as well. They announced earlier this year that they're having their, like, part of their platform is going to be something similar, or is already. I can't recall. And so you see these financing options uh, being brought in, not as a third party to be like into a platform that you could use as a company. They're already part of a platform.
Mhm.
And and so are we going to see education startups and financial services being kind of like one and the
Mhm.
same,
Mhm.
uh, that you do not need to go get a loan anymore somewhere? Like, it's just like there's different mechanisms how you could start paying and how you can pay later from your salary. I don't
Mhm.
know.
Yeah, it's
Interesting space.
fascinating. Like, I mean, because like the founder of Lambda School gave the example that and they have a 9-month program, so you can go through a 9-month program, get a job, and then you pay something like I don't know, some percentage of your salary if you make more than $50,000. So, and then that only lasts for like 3 years. So at the end of 4 years, you've gone to school, you've paid off what you owed completely, and you have a great job, probably making 6 figures. And you
Hmm.
compare that to a traditional, at least in the US, 4-year education, with the at the end of that 4 years, you owe 100,000,
Right.
and
Yeah.
it's just night and day different. It's really kind of
It is.
inspiring.
That topic is very like what. So what do you think? Is there a place for what's the future for education institutions? Like, what's the future for universities, colleges?
I don't know. I have to say, as somebody who is a developer and who went to university, but I feel like most of my skills that have actually paid the bills have all been things I learned myself as a developer and being, kind of a business owner. We also homeschool our kids, so I think a lot about their futures and their, career trajectories. And I'm much more bullish on the kind of entrepreneurial, learn skills yourself, route. There's a lot of obviously things that make sense for a more traditional educational path. There's a lot of great things about going to university. It's a cool experience, but it's just gotten
Hmm.
very expensive. you know
Have you decided, like, how far are you going to homeschool your kids?
We don't know exactly. It's one of those things you kind of have to play it by ear. If they start to really want to go into public school or something like that, then you say, okay, cool. But the plan is to do it as long as we can. So we'll see how long that lasts. But throughout the whole process, they're involved in all sorts of extracurriculars and volunteering, and I want to get them to start doing entrepreneurial things as young as
Yeah.
like teenagers. Actually, my daughter, she draws a lot. She draws all the time and stuff, and so I got her an iPad, and she started drawing there. And then I was like, we should try to get you like a freelance gig. So I got her this like $10 gig illustrating a picture of somebody's dog,
Oh, that's awesome.
and so she officially. I don't know if I've actually given her the money yet. I think it's still sitting in my PayPal account.
To dad's bank. Dad's
Yeah,
bank is safe.
but
Um,
I was excited about that.
yeah, that's my brother is similar with his kids. My brother is very entrepreneurial. He has 4 children, and all of them, like, he's looking for every opportunity to teach that. And I could see that all 4 kids are very different. Some are more entrepreneurial and others are not. So that's why the education for me is always, I'm curious that we celebrate entrepreneurship, but not everybody is.
Yeah.
entrepreneur. And then the unfortunate thing that we see is that a lot of people start losing the kind of concept of like self-worth, or like that they haven't really figured out like good place in life because they
Right.
are not entrepreneurs.
Right.
And it's we need those people that are not entrepreneurs.
Right.
We need people that are doing like that are working for someone else.
Right.
uh,
Right.
you know
You need the
and so
accountants and the all the people that make infrastructure run and society
we need
run and all
developers
that.
as well that are
Yeah.
not
Yeah,
entrepreneurs,
yeah, 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 all that.
Otherwise it will be very expensive to afford developers.
Right. What do you think? What do you think that how do you see this playing out with traditional education? And also how do you compare the way things, because you've been in Canada, you've been in a lot of different countries in Europe. So how do you sort of see the different models working?
So I come from a country where there's a lot of so European education tends to be a lot more specialized. Especially when I was studying, it was, hey, if you are going, like, do you go to law school? Then you're studying law all the time. If you're going, if you want to become an engineer, you just study that all the time. The same for developers and so on. And and that's it's more like the exact science, kind of the exact like a concentrated education.
Hmm.
Um, I went to a more liberal arts university that I had both history, philosophy, theology, economics. I had a concentration in business, but the premise of liberal arts is to give you a foundation, kind of broader view foundation, and hope that that is a good foundation for you to grow further. And and I've seen pros and cons, and so I look at, would you be able to teach development in university? Well, that person needs to want that. Like you need to have a passion for it.
Yeah.
So maybe that. And the university, I remember somebody said that you're not going to be learning as much in the classroom as much you'll do in the dorm. Because that's where the social happens. That's where you're actually like studying and interacting and like doing life, and that's when you learn a lot. And so I find that like that's not partying necessarily. You don't want to just kind of, hey, so you just go to university for a party. No, but I feel like there's connections that you build in university. Fast forward like 10, 20 years later, those people are going to be very influential in different areas. So you suddenly build a network that's really
Right.
good.
Right.
And, so, sorry, this is like, is there some music like?
Do you hear the teapot?
No, but I'm hearing music. Sorry, like hold on, I'm gonna check one thing.
Sure.
Sorry, I'm also realizing it was on. I was not on a. I was on a battery going, so this might increase everything now.
Okay, good.
Improve the speed. Sorry,
No worries.
I thought I clicked everything. Anyway, so going back to that education, be I did write an article. It was more like a facetious one, like artificially driven Montessori school,
Okay.
um, because it's like Star Trek, the Vulcans, when they like when you look at some of those. I can't remember which movie was that, but they were showing just these pods, learning pods, where the kids were individually just kids, and like you have screens everywhere, and it's just
Right.
teaching you personalized. I think that's ultimately where we're going to go, like futuristically. Is right now it's really weird how all the system takes the kids from grade 1 to grade 12, or like everybody learns the same thing, and so we don't really do good job in terms of understanding their comprehension. You whether fake it that you understand, or you don't understand it and you move on, which will prohibit you from like understanding some of the concepts later on. So
Yeah.
there's and if somebody detects that you're not comprehending, it's almost punished. You're like left after school, or like this, for another year.
Yep.
So I think that's and another friend of mine is working on in a company where they are um, measuring a comprehension of a topic of in certain kind of industry, and they're measuring whether you are comprehending when you're learning.
Interesting.
And I think that's the missing piece a lot, is because when we enroll in something, it's really, and even in professional development, in professional education, there's, I've been in organizations where somebody mentions EBITDA and all these other acronyms, and some people like, what is that? And other people like totally understand what that means, and they can explain so much more. And so how do you even bring that corporate education, and how do you bring everybody's awareness without kind of like calling somebody out that they don't understand? But like, and I think it's that personalized education that can only be solved by AI. It's understanding their comprehension on certain topics, and then redirecting them to the certain route to give them the information in a shape and form that they will understand the best.
Mhm,
And so that, I think that's the kind of ultimate future, both in the formal, like kind of formal education, but also for development.
mhm.
I would even say like, yeah, that's kind
I've
of like what's in my mind.
That's really interesting. I've been thinking so much lately about finding the thing or things that you love to do and are passionate about, like finding that thing. And I've been thinking about it for myself, and also I think about it for my kids and for people in general. Like, I feel like the people that really find that thing that, like in Japanese, there's this term ikigai, which is the kind of the intersection of what you're good at, what's valuable to society, what you like to do, and something else. And I've just been thinking a lot about that and sort of trying to find that for myself. And I think that, like, I don't know, it's magical if you find that thing, that because the difference between when you're working on something because you have to work on it versus you're doing
Yeah.
something you're just driven, like you're just excited about it, and it's almost effortless in a way.
Yeah, but what do you do when you can't find that?
Exactly.
Right? But I
Yeah,
think that's the challenge in society. There's no shortage of people that like we can follow as influencers who live the life that you're like, well, I'd like that too.
yeah,
And they have clearly found something that they love, and that those are the stories that we hear. I and I totally am on the same, like, find what you like, but sometimes, just sometimes, I'd like to maybe look at the opposite. I'd be like, screw your passion. um, Pursue what earns your money, and then you can
right,
afford a passion.
right,
I know a lot of like high school, like I know a lot of teachers, like school teachers, like friends of mine who are arguably doing what they're passionate about, but
right,
they can't afford to travel. They can't afford to do many things.
right.
And so I mean, I'm not like, this is never really like a simple way, but I would say that part of that education, and part of what we're missing is for us to be able, like, there's so many different paths where we could be satisfied with what we do, but unfortunately we are still kind of very, like, we only understand several paths, like, oh, do you want to be a developer? Well, I mean, developers come in so many different like variations
Yeah,
what you could be developing.
yeah,
And so when someone just looks at like, hey, do you want to be a developer? That's one, like, that we're kind of treating the world only like, oh, that's the only option there is, but there's so many different other things, and how do you find out about them? So that's what's really missing, is
mhm,
that personalized personalized code, like that Montessori experience where you are, it's very unique, very personalized,
right,
like direct to you, like helps you to figure out what you're passionate about, and
right,
and shapes you up in that.
yeah,
I think that's where my hope is for the education, and my hope is that the official education institutions will facilitate that a lot more.
yeah.
I mean, they don't have any other choice. I think it's one of those, people are going for more alternative education
Mhm.
than official one. But there's a place for that.
Yeah. What do you think are some of the gaps when it comes to within e-commerce groups, digital agencies, merchants, when it comes to training or education? What are some of the gaps that you see that could be filled there?
Oh well, I've been in both. I've been a lot of like most of my adult life I've spent on the agency world, but then I was also heading ecom at the biotech, B2B, totally different world. And I would say that, well, one thing that stood out to me from that experience was that as consultants and as agencies, we are not paid enough to be able to do a good job. Um, the
That's a
point
big
is like you
statement.
could, well, when you think about recommendations, like as consultants, we're like, hey, do this, do that. We don't have the like obligation to see it through.
Yeah,
There's no kind like if it doesn't work, it's easy to point out like why it didn't work for them because they didn't do it the way that you told them or some other reasons came up.
right.
And so your recommendations are only part of the problem that they're lacking, that well, like they don't know what to do. They also need to know how to do it. And in order, and that how is not always that technical thing. That knowledge also lies in politics, in like in looking like who do you need to talk to in that organization in order to get a buy-in, from another bigger group. Who is like those things don't happen in official meetings.
Mm.
And I've seen agencies like Sapiens and other big ones where they do have a placement, a permanent placement, somebody from Sapien or Accenture. They have someone who is always there in a client site. Um, then they understand how the organization works better. So it's not only that recommendation, it's also it's also strengthened with context that
Mm.
they know that that could work within that budget, within that specific method.
Yeah.
And so that's maybe that I've noticed quite a lot is that when I was on a client side and agencies were coming and recommending different things, like I know what to do, like I know what to do for next 2-3 years. That's not a problem. I need to figure out like how to get it done.
Uh,
I know with budget restrictions, with all the different other things that are happening, different priorities of the company, they don't see them. So that's uh that's maybe what I've noticed, a kind of a big gap. In e-commerce, I see a lot of agencies as well predominantly limit themselves to whether integrations or whether design. But I don't see a lot of agencies offering like kind of that big five, or they kind of Accenture, Boston Consulting Group kind of thinking, like business thinking. Like a lot of companies will do, hey, we want to do free shipping campaign, and that's almost becomes like a marketing campaign.
mhm.
But no, very very few in my experience have actually done the enough calculations to make sure that the free shipping campaign earns their money. It's not supposed to be marketing campaign. I mean, it could be used as marketing campaign, but you still need to make money.
Mhm.
Um, and so like there's that number analysis crunching, or
Mhm.
the loyalty reward systems, where um, quite often everybody's like, hey, our competitors have that, like also let's give them like let's offer some points. And um, and what happens interesting with these systems is that late after a few years you realize that you are a lot more liberal with the points. You have to now scale down,
Uh,
and nobody likes that, because you realize that after many years you start crunching the numbers, like is this really good for us? And
yeah.
priorities change, and so there's not enough business consulting, like kind of like business analysis, not business analysis and technical side, but it's a kind of accounting, like a number crunching to think, okay, let's if we offer free shipping for this segment, or over like we want to increase like over $80, what do we do with those, like with the 20% of audience that was already spending $150 and more?
Mm.
Now they're getting automatic free shipping. We're
Mm.
not like benefiting anything from them.
Yeah.
So you have to keep that in mind. And that's, it hasn't happened enough. Like I haven't seen it enough. It's whether agencies are whether making the stores look pretty, or making them functional,
Mm.
but they don't go back into that kind of business.
Yeah. I listened to this Freakonomics podcast over the weekend where they're basically talking about if advertising works, like just period. Does advertising work? And
Oh,
it's fascinating. They have, one a representative from the head of some big marketing association, and then there's the researchers that are doing the study, and of course, everybody has their biases on it. And they say, well, Coca-Cola and all of these big companies that have always advertised, of course, it works. But they dig into the numbers, and according to this study, they find that some relatively small advertising elasticity number, like if you double your marketing budget, you'll get a 1% increase in revenue. Some
oh,
surprising result that they found. But it's funny how there can be things that seem so obviously true, like what you're saying. Well, free shipping obviously is going to work, or rewards system is, or advertising. These things obviously work. But then if you take a minute and take a step back and go, well, okay, let's let's actually. Does anybody ever actually go? Let's actually look at the numbers and see how well this
yes.
actually works.
So few.
Yeah,
So few. Because even when you take a look at advertising, paid media, you only look at that first purchase. Mostly. Most people, like, it's like how many moves in chess can you think um, ahead? And the first move is, okay, this is how much we paid in advertising, this is how much we earned. Was it worth it? Okay. But then another move, like a few moves later, it's like customer lifetime value.
yeah.
It's like, okay, well, we spent $20 to get maybe $30 purchase. Not the best, but that's the first purchase.
Mm,
If you get 5 purchases from that person within the next 2 years, great. Um, but everybody stops at that kind of first, and so
right.
that's it, it's a we have different opinions. And what was that? Uh, Avinash from Google Analytics said that analytics is the best way to shut up stupid opinions. Um, um,
Right.
it helps, but you still deal with people, right? And so no matter what maybe that it's the right thing to do or not, you still deal with people, and they have opinions and they have biases. And so
Right.
I think another, going back to that original question, what's the gap? Is that buy-in management, and I've had struggle with that myself, and I had to learn a lot as well. Is that you know what needs to be done. You see that there's no other option to do it, that there's only that one option, but you still have to walk everybody along your thoughts.
Right.
Nobody spends so much time on the e-commerce or thinking about what you think, and so now you have to convey that and get somebody else buy-in.
Yeah.
And agencies quite often, again, like I do consulting, I work for agencies, but we quite often need to produce quick results, give quick recommendations, and then that's where it stops, because then we're not doing the implementation. So I do like some agencies that are now like some of the compensation is based on performance. It's easier for some than others. In paid media, I've seen some. I've seen actually one e-commerce agency. They have done revenue share. They've built. They You need to have quite few years of existing performance to see like how, like, what's the growth. And this year has screwed up everything
Right.
in terms of like benchmarking of any sort. But the theory was, or the practice for them was really good, was that they established a good benchmark. They said, okay, we're going to rebuild everything for you, um, and the idea is that they don't have to pay 100, 200, whatever $1,000 those are right now, but they would be able to pay it based on revenue increase.
Right.
And so if you're doing your job well, like you would see growth, and you would want to be paid within 2, 3 years. Um, and maybe that was enough to do the work only for that first half a year, and you don't need to do the next 3 years.
Mm,
Like, it depends how long is your contract. And so
yeah.
there's like, hey, all the benefit. Um, but that's another interesting model where you are responsible for your recommendations.
That's yeah,
And
that's it's I've always sort of thought that things should go that direction. I mean, if you are a specialist in doing X, Y, and Z to produce results, it seems like inevitably you'd want to get a piece of that, and that you'd be the most incentivized to do it that way. Um,
But how do you track the small
Yeah.
recommendations? Like, that one half an hour call that you gave
Yeah.
client and it saved them $2 million
Right.
in span of next 2 years.
Right.
Uh, right. And that's maybe the blockchain. That's like, because I worked with scientists, they also have similar problem, right? Like you take a look at Nobel Prize and all these other prizes that are given, it's given to some of the leads only. Um, they're not the only ones who did the job.
Right.
There's like so much surrounded, and especially now in science. And I think that's the great thing about this pandemic is that we are collectively better educated of like how does the drug development happen. Like I think society needs to be even more educated about that. But uh, that's a different conversation altogether. Uh, but with science, that's also the problem is attribution.
Yeah.
There might be someone who has an idea or who is like, hey, you know what, have you thought of that? And that idea actually makes a really good change, but it's maybe like, it's that domino effect.
Yeah.
So how do you, when there's a big like awards or big money benefit, how do you compensate maybe somebody who is like down the road that
Yeah.
and one conversation is about the blockchain is maybe some type of blockchain mechanism is used for consulting where there's like you have identified it's like hey like about free shipping and there's this like specific thing and somehow it is being recorded in some type of like crazy system
Mm.
and at the end of the day you're able to extract the okay how much benefit was like drawn out of that small like one recommendation.
That's
Maybe
interesting.
that's maybe I'm talking about like like 10 years too far
Yeah.
but
Well, it seems like blockchain in general is it's kind of 10, can start to wrap our heads around it, start to see some implementations of it, but it's kind of like the whole thing is almost like 10 years out before we're going to really, have an understanding of it. It's like such early
or it's
days.
going to be like I think that the companies are doing great stuff. It's just we're not finding out about it.
Yeah.
Um, I think there's a lot of stuff that is great, and there's like one side is like I just don't understand how it all works,
Yeah.
but also there's so many companies that are doing stuff that nobody they don't talk about that
Yeah.
much
Yeah.
and solving problems. And so after a few years, you're like, oh, you should do that. It's like, yeah, it's been done. It's like,
Yeah.
oh, what do you? It's working.
Yeah. Yeah. There's
For AI, you said you're listening to AI. Like, what stands out to you about AI?
Oh man, yeah, the podcast, Lex Friedman podcast, he talks a good bit about AI. I think he works on some vision-based machine learning stuff. He's talked a little bit about some of
Okay.
the stuff happening with Tesla, with autopilot. And actually, a lot of his recent interviews have broadened out and not been too AI specific. Um, but so I'm struggling to think of anything real interesting that I've learned recently related to AI. But it's something that yeah, I'm always kind of thinking about and looking for interesting nuggets. Um,
I think right now, some like my friend is doing masters in, um, but what's his interest is like technology ethics,
mhm.
and so there's like it surrounds a lot of AI conversations, and that's where like and we have the movie that came out. What was it? Social Dilemma.
Mhm.
We have many different books are coming out. Like people are finally waking up and trying to think about like, what is this? Like, where's somebody like not monitoring in terms of this big brother, but where is somebody evaluating what's good, what's not good?
Mhm.
And that's an interesting topic there. Um,
I I
that I
think
think we're going to see more.
yeah, I really so Neuralink is very interesting and a little bit terrifying. The project that
What
Elon
is it?
Musk. So this is the chip
Oh yeah. Right,
that
right.
they're going to implant in
I,
your brain to have a high bandwidth communication channel to um, devices essentially, and they're testing it in pigs. And I think their I think their tagline is if you can't beat them, join them.
Yeah, I understand that angle, and
Yeah,
maybe my brain is just like subconsciously ignoring all the news about it.
yeah,
Like I have not really looked into that
yeah,
much, and other than just like they did it on a pig, and
yeah.
ooh,
It's I mean, Yeah, it's scary to think about that future, but I mean, I do think we're going there. I mean, have you seen GPT-3?
Love
GPT-3,
it.
yeah, yeah. There's a
It's
guy
scary and love it.
Yeah, there's a guy building a system called copy.ai, which generates sales copy using GPT-3, who I'm gonna get on the podcast
GPT
soon.
working really well.
And yeah, and it seems to be working. So that's, I mean, that kind of just came out of nowhere. And all of a sudden, it was like this step change in the quality of text content that was being generated. And you're like scratching your head
Yeah,
going, I didn't know this was possible, you know?
yeah. No, I used it one some similar service. It created copies for Facebook or for Google Ads and or tagline, and I was just trying to see like what it can do, and you know what, it did a really good job. Like, I mean, there's a lot of things that are like, oh yeah, this is not going to work, you know.
But you
But
can
there was one
see how
actually.
fast it's going, and you can kind of,
Yeah,
yeah, yeah,
that's the fascinating part, and I feel like that is so well for advertising. Like thinking about how much time is being spent trying to craft that perfect copy and optimizing it, how I could see how that would be such a godsend, you know, like in time saving.
yeah,
You know, you do so much more automation, and even I'm wondering sometimes, like I would love to see newsletters. I have a agency that I worked with, Modern Craft, and they're more like strategy consultants and more like the kind of brand strategy and a big kind of vision planning for companies. And and they send out amazing newsletter every 2 weeks. And I truly like one of those few newsletters that I still keep subscribing to. And it's like a conversation. And John Onpo, he composes. It's about marketing, more geared towards CMOs, and it's a conversation. It's like, hey, this is like he kind of observes what has been happening in the past 2 weeks and writes in almost a couple of bullet points, but each of those bullet points sounds like a continuation of a sentence, and then off shoots off to another article. And it's so pleasant to read, easy to read, rather than just like this jam of uh, jammed links and paragraphs and everything
hmm,
else. It was just easy to go through,
right,
and I was thinking, he's like, I'm wondering if that can be trained to just write it in that way. So, um,
right, right,
like if you could just give a certain format, right?
right. Yeah, that does actually seem, you know, because you could probably like aggregate links, you know, bookmark links that were interesting. Like I was talking to a buddy recently who likes to read articles and then share the articles he's read.
hmm
But I could imagine you just simply bookmarking 5, 6, 7 links that you thought were interesting this week, and then you have an GPT-3 that's kind of maybe trained on your tone or your style. Maybe you have a more
Yep.
natural style, or you know, whatever, and it's just generating like a short sentence about each link or something
Yeah.
like that. Could be a really
Think
simple
about your
product.
newsletters, right? It's like it's like if you're able to train it to do at least maybe a portion of that,
Yeah,
you know, for you, like instead of you writing it all the time.
yeah,
I can
yeah,
see how those are going to be the future of newsletters.
yeah. I want to ask a little bit more about Apply Digital. I know you talked a little bit about some of the work that you
Yeah.
do there, and I took a look at the website this morning, and I think like you kind of talked about this, but you guys focus not just on like not just a typical e-commerce agency, but you do a lot of product consulting as well. I was just curious to know like kind of what makes Apply Digital unique, and you know what differentiates them as an agency.
Yeah, so apply digital. It's interesting to see how at some point in the past I was working for Blast Radius, and then from that one agency, different other agencies spin off. Like Modern Craft is one of them. You know, like Apply Digital is another one, and Apply Digital is one of the agencies I'm working with, and they predominantly focus on like product design and development. E-commerce, it was interesting when we were crafting a point of view of like what is e-commerce and are we doing it or not. Well, e-commerce is just a touch point of a broader customer experience. I mean, Like when you really consider that, it's really true. Like it's not. There are agencies and there are consultants that focus just on e-commerce, but when you look at that kind of omnichannel or holistic journey or everything, like no matter what buzzword you look at, when somebody engages with a brand, um, they engage with so many different properties, so many apps, and e-com, that transactional experience or that shopping is just one of the points of that experience.
Mm.
And so when you approach products like that, projects like that, then you look at a lot broader and you start developing environment or these experiences that truly add value.
Yeah.
There's you're not just building a website or like a platform of some sort just to because client asked and it looks good. You look for that. Where is that smart aspect of that platform? Whether if it's that um, there's this one case study that is being published soon, Play, which if for those who are gamers,
Hmm.
uh, they wanna play with their buddies, and they want to put like let's say, hey, let's play for $10. But FIFA or Madden's and all these other couple of games. So how do you do that? Well, right now everybody kind of goes in on their system. They play a game and then maybe wired it through PayPal. But somebody could say like, no, I won. It's like what's mechanism there? Like let alone if you play with a stranger for more money. So Play raised quite a lot of money to build the platform, and they came to apply to say, okay, there's this idea, like we can like this there's really good niche. Like what's the best way to go about building it? And that's where Apply is really good at knowing how to build the product in the best possible way from like as a business. You're not only executing some like clients that are like, hey, this is what I want to build and like here's exact specs. No, you actually help to define what it needs to be and how it needs to work and how it needs to like how it can be earning money. And so part of that definition was like, hey, you're using this uh, machine vision to determine who is winning. You establish escrows to make sure that you keep the money and put it out like and dispense it only when the winner is determined. That is being determined also by the machine. You machine learns, like a machine observes a player, and in 10 games they understand whether you're expert or you're beginner, so that nobody can take somebody like, oh, like like I'm a beginner, let's play for $100.
Right.
They're truly an expert, right? So that's maybe the easiest way to describe like it is. What makes it different and what the applies thinking is that it's not only just designing a good product, it's actually helping you to create product like vision, the strategy behind it. Because quite often the entrepreneurs, when they have ideas, they don't necessarily know all the details how they're going to get it done.
Mm.
And so there's that bridging the gap between, okay, well, this is you come with the money and you come with that vision, understand your desire. Let's understand the market, the user, like what do they want truly, and then technology capabilities and limitations, what can be done, and you create that plan and you execute it really well. And so that's where e-commerce as well is, right? If that is a company that um, e-commerce, we always see like maybe this shopping, this really like a very clear like Shopify shopping experience, homepage and so on. But e-commerce is also some of the B2B industries where they like publishing companies where they need publish like builders need to publish certain kind of like announcements that they have finished certain project because of the legislations and like regulations that they can get money from the banks if it's published in the proper place. Even enabling that kind of 100-year-old company who has been doing publishing for construction companies. You digitize that, and that's an e-commerce too. You see like how that fits in a broader scale, and you need to figure out how to make it so that it actually makes money. Because before that, money was like their cost was based on like words or lines because there was actual print was printed. But when you transition from a print into digital, you don't have the limitation anymore.
Mhm.
There's no limit to the space. So you can't really charge on the same level with the
Mm,
same pricing. So you have to rethink it. You
mm.
have to help them to rethink their business, and that's yeah, that's what Apply is doing really well.
That's cool. I feel like you have an interesting perspective, having worked agency side and also been really deep within a merchant company, and having been on both sides and understanding. I know a lot of people who have just pretty much always worked at an agency, and they enjoy that. They enjoy the diversity of
Yeah.
projects and getting to work on new things and moving at a fast pace. But I think that you probably have developed a stronger intuition or empathy for the way things need to happen, the internal politics, the way that um, things need to be moved forward within a merchant, within a company. And I think you probably have a unique perspective there, and are able to help get things done.
Sometimes I would say that those who don't have the perspective, it's easier to get things done because you just don't know what you're not like what you're dealing with. You just go plow through and like, oh, okay, well, I didn't know that was not okay, but here's the result.
Yeah,
Um, as I would, yeah, I do have that like unique perspective, and I truly appreciate that past. Um, both sides are amazing. I would say that I like the agency side for the ability to change contexts. Like you have three, four, or five clients at the same time, so you have to switch around context, and that's the energy you're able to like build something you have not done before. But also client side, it allows you to go so much deeper. Where it's you are maybe working on one or two things for years, but really really digging deep. That's something that agency will never have the luxury to be able to do. Now what I'm also noticed was that client side, they're doing everything for the first time and the only time.
yeah,
Like when you're doing Magento migration, that team is doing it for the first time, that and the only time.
yeah,
They shouldn't be migrating again the same, like that's it. And so when you think about the amount of knowledge that is being like not wasted, but it like they're spending all that effort to just do that one job once,
yeah.
and that's it. And so that's where agency, I think, is really like they have done it many times, and so
Right.
they're able to help with that a lot more. So there's pros and cons, and like it's a I recommend everybody to experience both sides.
Yeah. I think that's a smart
Have you been on the
recommendation.
client side, or you
Yeah.
only been on
Yeah,
the?
I worked for
Yeah, what were
a
you doing?
company called Clean Program. It was a supplements company. They sold cleanses and stuff like that. And
All right.
I did an upgrade. Actually, I did a Magento upgrade for them, and it went really well. So they brought me on full time, and it was a great job. I was living in LA at the time. They were based in LA, so I was mostly
Mm-hmm.
remote, but we'd hang out in person. Great team. Really, really enjoyed it. And yeah, so I did, a bunch of Magento development for them, and it was cool. It was a fun experience.
Yeah, it's fascinating to see how much. Like I remember where we had the biotech where I was working. We had to solve China. We had to like China speed. Like like there was a lot of like there's a great firewall of China as well that you need to deal with. And if you want to like we had a good amount of clients in China, and so how do you solve it when all your servers are in US? Everything, all the services, everything is US based.
Yeah.
And I remember there was one technical architect or one dev that who spent probably 2 months on exploring, like measuring, testing, just trying to find out a, a way to improve the speed. And there's so many different options. But once we figured out, I said, like, can we just write a blog about it? Because that knowledge is just gone.
Right.
Like, you're moving on to some other projects. Nobody ever is going back. Like, what happens with all this insight that we just spent?
Yeah.
We didn't publish it. Like, unfortunately, we didn't publish it, but But
And
those
that's
are
kind of the
interesting kind of
downside of
experiences.
being client side is that there isn't that incentive to share it, right? Like you wanted to share it because you probably have that thing in you. That's the reason you're agency side of where you want to share things like that. Like the idea of sharing that knowledge and compounding the value that was created is something that you just are driven to do. But like because for an agency when they publish that blog post, that's marketing for them.
Yes.
There's an incentive
Yeah.
there, whereas client side they might want to do it. And sometimes clients will share that kind of stuff, but a lot of times they don't because there really isn't the incentive. But I'm curious, how did you get around the firewall? The Chinese.
Well, I don't think it's been few years, so there might be like already different solutions, but like there were a couple of options we needed to look at, even like different CDNs.
Oh, okay.
We were even exploring whether you like put like an actual server in within China, and I think temporarily we went with the server in Japan, and um, there were various like CDN, even if there is it a Chinese CDN that provides service in North America, or North American CDN that has some like servers in China.
Gotcha.
I honestly I can't remember which option did we end up with. We finished it. The speed was much better. We had to limit a couple of we couldn't track Google anymore. We had to give up Google
Right.
Analytics.
Right.
That was we had to like use their analytics platform, and there were a couple of other trade-offs that unfortunately had to be done.
Yeah.
And so again, it's been a few years. I don't remember the details anymore, but it would have been great if there would be somewhere where it's like, yeah, there was post, like it was post. Just
Right.
go there. It's all the details. It's old details probably. There's so much more new things now.
Yeah. Well, Janis, it's been a lot of fun catching up with you.
Absolutely.
Where's the best place for people to find you online? Any last plugs you want to give before we wrap up?
Online for me, I don't have a blog. If I write something, it's going to be published on LinkedIn. So find me on LinkedIn. Um, I'm also building out a website called Brickley with K.com, and it's mostly focused around e-commerce. Not as a like a blog site, but that's something that's as an angle that I'm looking at, where I could publish an article, and I'm working on one right now that deals with uh, how do you differentiate between uh, different strategies, like a commercial or customer experience strategies, strategies that optimize customer experience versus those that are um, driving and optimizing revenue. And it's important for companies to really understand the difference. That's going to
Mm,
help them a lot more in just buy-in and in planning. And that's where some of that, like free shipping, for example, free shipping is not really, it shouldn't be marketing like customer experience strategy. It should be a commercial one. It is to drive revenue. But when you think about optimizing checkout, because everybody feels like because it deals with money that it's a revenue kind of strategy. It's like, no, actually, it should be approached more like a customer experience strategy.
nice.
You want to make the buying process easier. So it's a conversation around that that I'm writing out, and there's a couple of other interesting topics that hopefully we'll be able to publish soon. So stay tuned on that
We'll have
on
to
my
do
LinkedIn probably.
a whole other podcast because that sounds really
Would love
interesting.
to.
So I'd love to talk about that. All right, man. Thanks. We'll talk to you
Yeah, and
soon.
thanks for having me. It's great to see the videos, especially when you cut the pieces and you just publish the small pieces. I was like, oh, this is great, like because that's like the gems are coming.
Awesome. Awesome.
So
All right, brother. I'll talk to you soon.